Laura. I'm the Director of Educational Initiatives for Holmes Murphy, and we are happy to have you back for kind of round 4 to talk about, once we align philosophy, policy, and resources, how the heck do we get this information to the students? This is what I kind of worked on, this is what I did within Pi Kappa Phi. Starting in 2003, we really launched a program and continued to launch programs within Pi Kappa Phi. And so I could sit here and talk to you all day long, and I'll probably interject a lot, but I've been watching Andrea Kleeclamp from a distance and not so distant for the past few years, and she came on as the Director of Health and Wellness for Phi Kappa Psi, and really an organization who I would say didn't have much. And I have watched her. She has done some things that I've done, and then she's gone on to do some really cool, different things. So I thought it would be beneficial to hear from her today about her journey in the past 2 years, what she's done, what she's learned, and then I'll probably jump in a little bit and talk about my perspective as well. And as always, if you have questions, just IM those, and I'll make sure I'll be tracking those as she speaks with us this morning. So I will turn it over to you, my friend.
Thanks, Lori. Good morning, everyone. Super pumped to talk Elevate. I always tell people I could spend 3 days talking about Elevate if you would let me. But this will be a quick overview this morning. So if you have questions, if you want any of our resources, I'm happy to share, because so much of what I've been able to do is because I found good collaborators. So please let me know. So we will get rolling. I should also tell you that I really like memes and puns, so you'll see them throughout. I like to think you'll be chuckling at your desk, but if not, that's cool. My background is primarily doing campus work. Prior to joining FISA, I had been on campuses for about 8 years. Really, my passion for this kind of work started when I worked at Texas A&M with risk management education with fraternities and sororities. Have also done just straight working with fraternities and sororities, and then right before I joined FISA, I was actually working in a women's center, which is a lot of learning how to collaborate and work with no money. But saw the position at FISA, and I was like, yeah, that's all the stuff I want to be doing. As Lori kind of alluded to, there was an initial vision that was really, all they had really done is a few letter of risk presentations. So I literally inherited a blank space. It was cool, but it was also really daunting for a 160-year-old organization to just hand me that. And so really my first step was I looked at a lot of, what are other organizations doing? So looking at, the PICOPs of the world to see what are the common vendors, what can we do? So out of that kind of grew my initial vision of what I wanted Elevate to be. So it is all our health and wellness programs, all our prevention, education, health promotion stuff is all under the Elevate umbrella. I often say, we know the issues our students are going to encounter, and so this is us providing that upfront knowledge and skills. And then our 5 deployment methods that we're using, and I'll walk through each of them throughout: resource connection, in-person education, online content, awareness campaigns, and ongoing support. And so really what we're striving to do is provide those common threads. So it's not a one-off conversation, it's an ongoing conversation. And I was telling Bobby and Lori right before this, I saw our national president this weekend, and he had drafted some language for an email about some hazing education. And he sat there and he told our comms person his feedback was that it needed to be aligned with 3P2E, because we've been through this process as an organization, but it's always great when he got it and I didn't have to tell him, and it was a good moment because that's the wavelength that I go on, but talking about what are the common threads, and even if it's a simple email, it always connects back to that education. So that's, I think, a really important piece of what we've been able to do is talking about Elevate as the umbrella. When I initially did this work, I focused a lot on what the issues were and explaining those. You'll see throughout, more than anything, I focus on how we're deploying education. And so that's, I think, been a really important shift of where I focus my energies and my time. I think we can all acknowledge and figure out what the issues are, and it's a lot more beneficial to think about how we can best deploy those. This is from the School of Lori Hart, but, behavior, it's a function of person and environment. We can't control ultimate behavior choices, but we can provide education and resources. And so I think that's an important distinction of what I'm trying to do and what we're trying to do through Elevate, providing all the knowledge and skills we can so when those decision points come, students have the ability to make those choices. Whether or not they do is another story. Other pieces that really have framed the work that I've done is the fact that we also know for all the education that we put out there, our members don't always take advantage of it. So I think this has been an important grounding for me as well, is thinking about this. Basically, our members don't know what the resources are. They're concerned about what other people will think, and they just don't make themselves a priority. And so with that, keeping that in mind, I've really strived with Elevate to kind of shift that script. And so thinking about the fact that fraternity can and should play a role in sharing information on resources. Fraternity can and should help reduce stigma and open up conversations in the room, and then provide that support for seeking help. So that said, throughout this, I've got some reflective questions for you all just to kind of think about. It's really important to think about what factors around education are within your control. So as you're building out education, what can you actually control? What are you requiring that you know you're going to have butts in the seats so that you can provide that education? But also understanding what factors are outside of your control. The other way I sometimes frame those two questions is like, what is this education going to be, and what is this education not going to be? And I think it's important there to look at both sides of the coin there. Also thinking about the barriers to accessing educational opportunities. What are the common excuses that you're hearing? It takes so much time to do. I'm so busy. What are those excuses? Because if you can identify those, you can also come up with reasons as to why those aren't good enough excuses and work through those. So I think that's an important piece of an educational conversation. Ways to enhance access, which might be in your deployment methods, and then what are the resources as far as time, talent, treasure you need to make that happen. And so sometimes before you can even build a program, doing that deep dive into these pieces can really help. Also, I get my inspiration for the work I do from what I call unexpected places. So a while ago, I was home. I actually work remotely, so I'm home every day. But on this day, I was home and I was watching the local news, and they had a story on men's health. So obviously, it's what I do every day. So I immediately perked up and was super pumped. But it was a study from the American Academy of Family Physicians, and the 10-year study on men's health. And one of the quotes that stuck with me from that was the fact that not feeling sick is not necessarily the same as being healthy. Similarly, a chapter not being in trouble does not mean they are doing everything right. But that's one piece of framing I've used. The other piece of framing I used from that just news story I just happened to see was this. 30% of men, so 30, wait as long as possible to go to the doctor. And so that's not just like, I've got some congestion, it's kind of uncomfortable. That's like, I have the black lung and I can't walk. So that's really, I think, an important piece. I usually, when I talk Elevate, if you hear me from any point forward, you will always hear me share that. One, it generally gets a laugh because men acknowledge that it is true. But it also kind of sets the stage for the culture. The other piece I read was actually in Delta. If you flew Delta last month, they had a really good men's health article. But 80% of men can name the make and model of their first car. Only 50% of those men can remember the last time they went to the doctor. So I think those are really important to step out of higher education and realize what we're dealing with. But two, just to understand again and ground in that. And also when you think about prevention education, it's changing culture and stopping problems before they start. Some of the other educational frameworks I've worked a lot with is figuring out what's already happening. And so a lot of what I did initially was figuring out what was already in place. And when I say that, I don't mean just Elevate-based programs. I really mean, in general, understanding what was happening in our fraternity. And I think because of that, I was able to use some existing systems and focus just on content. So instead of having to simultaneously build education and a system, I could just focus on the education because we knew that we wanted things to move. So quick resource audit that you can do in this lane. It says 4 C's. There's actually 5 C's there, so ignore that I can't count. But these are things to really, I think through about education that we oftentimes don't always think through. So communication. How can you, one, spread the word about what you're doing, but then also use that as an educational tool? And you'll see in just a hot minute how we use our communications stuff as education. Campus and community resources. You'll also see I lean heavily on what's already happening on campuses. I heard it explained on a webinar a few weeks back, the idea of bridging versus bonding. And so when we think about our students, what we really want to do with education is bridge and connect them to campus instead of creating that independent bond where they're just existing on an island. And so I will often say, like, if your campus has Green Dot as a bystander program, you should take advantage of Green Dot. I don't need to build out an independent program for you because that's a strong, robust, research-based program. Also, your contact points. What are the humans you're getting in front of your chapters, whether that be your staff, whether that be advisors you know and trust, or people that you'll have an opportunity to train. And then, of course, that cash piece. What money are you working with? What money do you need? What can you do with what you've got or with no money just to make it go? And then how could you do more? And so I think, again, as I talked about on the other reflective questions, really thinking about these pieces and thinking differently about the greater system of education can really help things go. And so one of the things we do is with our social media, we do a lot of awareness campaigns. The higher ed jargon is that, like, we can meet students where they are. Our students are literally on social media, so we should be in that space as well. And so we will use, we looked at national observances to identify some ones that we know particularly will resonate with our students and alumni, and we use those. So for instance, in September, we'll do Suicide Prevention Week. In February, we'll do Heart Health Month. We're actually also doing this on a weekly basis. So I am on our Snapchat, something I never ever would have thought I would do, but I'm on our Snapchat every week for Wellness Wednesday. It is literally a minute of education around a wellness topic, just to keep that in students' minds. And I don't really know who watches, because Snapchat you don't really know. But I will tell you, every conference I go to, I get recognized from that. And so I was at, we had a conference this weekend, and students came up and they're like, I see you every week. It was so cool to meet you in person. So I'm somewhat of an internet celebrity, but not really. But it is a really unique and different way to educate in that space. We're not looking at behavior change, probably likely not happening there, but it's reminding them that health and wellness is an organizational priority. We use it for some of our other things. And as today is Wednesday, after this, I will be on our Snapchat, but that's been, I think, a cool piece there. The other thing I would say with that we've looked at it in untraditional ways. And so we are gearing up for our biggest awareness campaign, which is around Movember. So we'll be in our 3rd year of partnering with the Movember Foundation, which focuses on awareness around prostate cancer, which will affect 1 in 7 men, testicular cancer, which is the most common cancer in men 15 to 34, mental health, where men are 3.5 times more likely than women to complete suicide, and then just general men's health, as we already talked about, men don't take care of themselves. But when we did our Thanksgiving messaging last year, one of the things we did was tied into that family connection, and this came partly from the Movember Foundation. But when you're home with family, that's a great way to broach some of those conversations. And so we've tried to land on the radar in different ways. When we did our Valentine's Day messaging, it was around loving yourself. And so, again, it's helped. I think one of the things with social media, initially I thought everything was going to go viral. It did not. And so particularly, I think because I work around men and health, I've learned that sometimes they're listening and they're not necessarily ready to talk. And I say that, and the example I would offer is that when we did Suicide Prevention Week in 16, we didn't get the buzz that I thought we would, but we did some post-assessment and found overwhelmingly that our students were supportive of what we were doing. And so on this data set, you'll see the green and red are agree. And so we saw that, one, our students said, yeah, mental health issues are a concern for college students. It's important for Phi-Psi to raise awareness on these. And most importantly, like, I'm proud to be a part of an organization that does that. And so I think that simple data set reminded me that sometimes our outcomes are not what we intend, but we're still educating. And so that's a good piece to keep in mind. So assessing your assessment, I think important always to think about, and I'm a data nerd, so I love it, but what's the data that we already have? What data sets do you already have that you're working with? You might have inherited no data sets, and that's okay, because then you've got to start building them out, which is very much the situation that I was in. What data do you need? And so an example I would give there's been some want to move Elevate into some alumni areas. I know college students very well. I can tell you how to educate college students, how to move the needle with college students. I know that. If you tell me how to get a grown man to better address his health, I do not know how to do that well. And so with that, I was like, we're going to have to build out an in-house data set. And so we did a survey of alumni this summer for some of our long-term planning. It won't happen anytime soon. To see what their health concerns were, to see if they were even interested in anything, to really hear from them, and that's helped. Anytime I collect data, too, I always try to ask our students to articulate, if someone asked you what were the benefits of this program, what would you say? That's the data I actually kick back to our foundation. So when they're out selling these programs, they have those student words to sell those programs, and that's been helpful. Thinking about your data collection points, when are you picking up that data? And even this weekend, we were at a conference, and my coworker was like, we'll hand out the survey at the very end. And I was like, people are leaving for the airport, and so if we do that, it's going to be a hot mess. It's not going to happen. And so we moved up when we distributed our survey, and just seeing that our return rates went up just a bit. Ways that you can bundle, so are there times that you can ask about multiple programs so you're not getting survey fatigue. One of the big ones I've learned is looking for easy answers that you might have unintentionally put into the space. And so when we did our Greek Life EDU custom questions last year, we had like brotherhood as a choice on multiple questions. So why did you join? What do you want to learn? Those sorts of things. And while great, it's an ambiguous term, and we unintentionally created a data set that we couldn't use to the levels that we wanted because it was the default answers. And so sometimes that's an important piece to look at as well. And then, as I mentioned earlier, also pay attention to that silence and those numbers that you're not getting. So quick exercise, it should say every resource. I probably had my coffee when I typed this, but I want you to just take a moment, find some scratch paper, and I'll give you about 30 seconds or so to do this. Think back to when you were at your undergraduate alma mater, and just take a moment and write down every resource you can think of there. So offices, departments, just take a moment and jot some of those down. Okay. I have you do that, one, to kind of get you back in the mindset of your undergraduate self. Two, because probably the worst kept secret in higher education is that campus websites are horrendous to navigate. And I think we can all acknowledge that trying to find things at universities, it can be quite a mess. And so, as I mentioned earlier, I come from the campus world, and so what made sense to me right away was before I built out anything for us at the national level, I wanted to know what was in the campus space. And so we work with what I call campus resource guides a lot. And so I have gone on, we're at just over 100 chapters, and I have been on all of those websites and done exhaustive, comprehensive searches of each and every resource that is on those. And so when our consultants hit the ground, they have a campus resource guide. So when they're meeting with chapter officers, they're doing a direct connect of what's there. When our standards team is going into spaces to navigate issues, they're working with campus resource guides. So they're making, again, that direct connect. And so it's not us having to run these things down. It's us being able to speak the language of the students. And so, you know, at KU, we don't just say, oh, you probably have a student health center. We're able to say, you should go to Watkins. We're at Texas A&M. We don't just say, I think, on my campus it was this thing. We're able to say, hey, it says on here, your campus health center is Butyl, and here's where it's located. And so that has really helped us out. Anytime we're doing a presentation, we're offering those personalized, specialized, unique resources. And so you can kind of see here what they look like. I'm also happy to share, but it has, it's all hyperlinked stuff. So it's kept as Google Docs that I do annual updates on. I'm amazed in a year how a campus website can change. But it has, policies. So we know what campuses have amnesty policies. We know what jurisdiction looks like. We know what bystander program they're using or not using. We have all that information readily available to us for use, and it's really, really helped. But what I also say too, like if I, as a professional who knows what I'm looking for, can't find something, there's no way that a 18, 19-year-old is going to be able to find it. And so we have that deep dive information. Other things we're doing, as I mentioned, initially the want, a lot of what Elevate was ladder of risk. And so when we relaunched, we knew that we wanted it to go, but also just didn't have the capacity to get our facilitator pool kind of re-up and vet them and get them up and going, do the scheduling, get the visits done. And we realized our consultants are going to be on the road. They already have visits scheduled, so why would we not go ahead and put them into that space? And so last fall, we handed over a letter of risk to our consultant team. Last fall, they were able to, in the course of their visits, do 93 presentations. And you'll see some of the assessment results there, overwhelmingly positive results. So initially we thought it was going to be a temporary thing. We've decided to leave the program with them because they do really well with it and the students respond. We are still doing ladder of risk on an annual basis just because it's not yet in the organizational fabric where we feel like we can rotate it. Other things we're doing, as I mentioned earlier, we were an early adopter of Greek Life EDU. We have not always used it at maximum capacity, so I've really worked to shift that. I always say it's providing introductory education. It's not meant to be the end-all, be-all. If it's the only time you have those conversations, you're not using it correctly, so making sure to do that. I've also worked with EverFi a lot to make sure that we're framing the language around it appropriately. So one of the things, for instance, I did is I worked with EverFi to get the average completion time for our students, because if you've talked to a student who's gone through it, they act like it takes days to complete. What we were able to find through that back-end data was that the average student, it only takes them, part one, they can finish in about an average of 45 minutes. So if they can do it in one sitting, it's really not that much of a time commit. And so we reframed some of our language to make sure we weren't unknowingly saying it's going to take you hours to get done, but this is a quick introductory conversation you're going to have. And again, like I said, we use those custom questions. In-person programs we're using, we use Social Strengths from Prevention Culture and Aaron Bowe. It actually originally was with our consultant team last spring. it was not a good fit given all the things we were asking our consultants to do. So this year we've moved it to a trained facilitator pool. We trained them in September at our headquarters, and we're implementing that now. And that will be an every other year program. With that one, we've been very mindful that we're supplementing, not duplicating, given all that's happening on campuses right now around that and the education that's required. And then we're in year one of ASTP, and so we did a training this summer with Kappa Kappa Gamma in Columbus, and then we've been able to pool some facilitators from some other orgs. The nice thing is the number of organizations that are using it allows us to build a strong facilitator pool. And then we know we want to do one other thing. We just don't know what that thing is yet, and it would depend who you asked in SciSci what they thought that thing should be. So that's coming. And then the last rollout that we've done that I'm really pumped for, probably because I thought of it, but also because it's really cool, is we use elevate the conversation. And so I knew when we were doing this initial rollout that we needed some kind of peer education, because a lot of what I've talked about is top-down stuff, and I wanted some bottom-up stuff. And so these are optional things that we can do. They're not required by students, but they allow for peer-to-peer conversations. And so it's education in either some of them are as short as 20 minutes. The longest one is over an hour, but reached out to our SciSci family, which is our volunteer network, and said, hey, here's the 4 topics that I want to cover. Anything, you can do anything you would like. And I looked and made sure they weren't things that were being covered exhaustively at the campus level, but go ahead and write away. And so the top of this slide, you'll see that's what they each look like. And so we've got a very easy to follow facilitator guide that students walk through. And so we've got ones, if you've seen the video that It's on Us pushed out about what if bears killed 1 in 5 people. There's one around that. There's ones around, what if physical health was treated like we treat mental health? There's stuff about the man box. There's stuff about coded language, male privilege, time management, anything. So we will do twice a year calls for content on this, where this is our first call. I actually will be doing our second call in the next few weeks, but it's really been incredible to see kind of the creative energies that our volunteers put behind, being able to write whatever they want and we're interested in. We also put Elevate in other places, and so this summer at our Woodrow Wilson Leadership School, we did some stuff around masculinity. So when you think about the socialization of leadership, particularly with men, masculinity plays a role. So we did some stuff around that, as well as self-care for leaders. So if you're not taking care of yourself, you can't be the leader you want to be. We had our inaugural professional development conference this last weekend. And we popped in some stuff on stress management. And y'all, I will tell you, it was unreal space that we unintentionally created, but we had, students who've been doing intensive career development all day take a moment and reflect on what they were worried about. Some very real fears that they were afraid of failure in career. And it was nice to have that, put that out into the space so they weren't feeling, like they were alone in that, and had our alumni coaches with phenomenal pedigrees also, talk to those men and say, you need to be getting your annual physical. You have, when you have insurance, you need to take advantage of those annual exams, have those conversations, stay connected. It was a really powerful space. So I always say, you have to give the space for that. And then when we do our regional officer training, we'll, again, have stuff on stress management and also helping a brother who's struggling. So just some quick things on that, cross-programming in 2.0, thinking about, what other educational programs do you have available? Elevate couldn't live in just one lane. It had to really go into the other lanes as well. Thinking about topic overlap, opportunities to build. I had a student say to me once, and his voice always just kind of sits, and I think through it often. After it was a presentation I gave, and he was like, Andrew, this is great. But at this point, I've heard it 5 times. He's like, at what point do I get to hear the 2.0 conversation? At what point do I get to hear what's next? So I always try to think about him and that framework, that if we have students coming back for more, we need to give them more and not just the same conversation. And then also just thinking about when a member's received all of this content, what what does that look like? What does that success look like? And then finally, kind of where we're going with this. And so actually, as a grant-funded position, I was able to hire a health and wellness consultant this fall. And so Drew works specifically with our chapter level education. So as I mentioned, we've rolled out ASTP and social strengths into volunteer facilitator programs. And he takes on all the scheduling for that as well as our ladder of risk assessment. So he, by working through that, allows me to then expand and work on some other things. And so having someone else on the team has helped immensely. In 2018, we are asking our chapters to appoint a health and wellness chair. One of the things we realized is we just kind of went with this, but we need a guy in the chapter who's actually doing this stuff. And so the ways that I've really pushed this is if you have someone who's interested in health professions, what a great thing to actually have that connect there and be able to say that you actually run a health-based program for your chapter. Have also encouraged chapters to expand programs. So while great that you have an intramural chair, maybe you could actually expand and challenge him a bit into a more expansive health position. And so we'll be offering initial training at our regional officer training. So from day one, they'll have that HQ support since there's no institutional background. And then really our big dream is to at some point fold this into a program, because we'll do these one-off trainings with people and our facilitators are brilliant, but to have a couple of days to really talk prevention education, to talk health education with volunteers within the profession, with alumni, with students is really where long-term we would like to go. So as I mentioned, that was a lot of Elevate and a little bit of time. So I have put my information on the slide here. I'm happy to answer any additional questions, but also happy to answer questions now as well.
Okay, I'm jumping in. Can you tell us a little bit about the budget and what that looks like? I know it's from the foundation. I heard you say that. But what is your budget? Because a lot of people probably on this call going, ow, this is a lot. It's great information, by the way.
Yeah, a lot of what we do is no cost. Our biggest costs come from the in-person education pieces. And so the fall grant I submitted was I believe $50,000 is what I worked with. But like Canvas resource guides, no cost. Elevate the Conversation was no cost. Greek Life EDU is a little bit more because we use coalition services. And then we have a formula that we used for ASCP social strengths with a little bit of cost because we did trainings and then for those initial visits, but we've really tried in those to get people local so we're not spending a lot so money doesn't get to be a barrier. So like I said, I credit the fact that I worked in a women's center with I thought real creatively about money because I didn't ever want that to be a barrier for why we couldn't get education in front of our students. And awareness campaigns too cost no money because we've got an in-house communications team that does fantastic work.
Okay, I think there was a question. Robert Riggs, were you typing and stopped, or did you get it answered? I got it answered. Okay. And just are there any other questions for her? This is great information. Any questions? Just to kind of flip it, I think, and look at what Pi Kappa Phi has done and how it is different and yet the same in many levels. When back in 2001, let's go back 16 years, when we were sitting there looking at a strategic plan around alcohol, the main thing that came out of it is we've got to do comprehensive education. The call to action report came out about in 2002 when we were still working on this report, and from that we pulled out ASTP. I remember calling Jason Kilmer for the first time. I didn't even know what it was. I was like, who are you, young, smart man in Washington, and how can we implement this? And that's when the button seat program became a thing in Pi Kappa Phi. That summer, we had been doing the STAR program that was the old Prevention Research Institute, and using their volunteers, really. We had trained a few PICAPs, but at that point, we started working on, if we use volunteers, what does this look like? So I think that first training, it was at Furman University. We trained about 45 men on this idea of ASTP and got that program on the road. It worked. I mean, you can collectively tell, and Andrea commented to this, you can tell when you do stuff, it actually works. I mean, just in their language and how they talk to you. And I just remember being at conferences, and students were like, I'm drinking a 12-ounce beer. I'm like, great. And they're like, from a keg. I'm like, not so great. We recognized very clearly early on that we can increase our knowledge around alcohol education and skills training, but if it wasn't coupled with policy education, we were missing a huge mark. And so in 2006, we rolled out kind of the same model with ladder of risk and taking it to our students. Up until that point, we were delivering it at regional conferences, and the information simply wasn't going back. At that point as well, our risk managers, they weren't sitting on the officer, they weren't officers, they were just appointed, and they were all freshmen, and it was very clear why the message wasn't getting back. So we started Ladder of Risk and put that on the road in 2006, and coupled that somewhere along the way with Greek Life EDU that is required for all associate members. ASTP is done every 3 years at a chapter by a trained volunteer, and Ladder of Risk is done every 2 years by a trained volunteer. I would say probably several years ago, I trained Ladder of Risk every annually in January. We train about 20 people. A few years ago, we really started scraping the barrel and finding 20 Pi Kappa 5s. I am a believer that education delivered by alumni is better. It's anecdotal, but if we can find those men who want to give and volunteer and have training experience, we tend to get better evaluations, and I tend to get better long-term value from those people. But we opened it up, just as every national, international group right now uses outside people, and we actively train those folks as well. We also, in Pi Kappa 5, prior to me leaving, rolled out our third, what I would call, button seat program. It's a program called Ultimate Respect, which kind of taps into their terminology of dude, ultimate respect, bro, ultimate respect, and really redefining, what do you mean by that? Like, is ultimate respect the moment when you say you're too drunk to drive, or you can't do that to an associate member, or is it ultimate respect, we can do whatever we want to do? So we're really taking terminology that they use and delving into sexual misconduct, hazing, using some TED Talks, and strangely enough, that program has the least framework. When I wrote it around, here's a TED Talk, here's what you can do in between, pick your own adventure. And we used our trained volunteers that have been in the business for many, many years with us, and that program has gotten the best feedback as far as this one's working. People are talking. Happy to share that curriculum. It's actually on the PICAP website in our transparency piece of this that you can find on our resources, the Ultimate Respect PowerPoint, and then you'll see in the notes section basically everything in there. So that's what we did. We did the major programming. My bandwidth, my time was really spent on being brought into sanctions, event planning, like insurance. We need a certificate of insurance for this, and this. That's really where my head got in the weeds in my last 4 or 5 years. And so you'll see a difference in what Andrea has been able to do versus kind of what I did. Like I sat and did emails like for hours every day, and some days it felt administrative in nature, and some days, we were getting them stuff that they needed. So that's kind of our end. We use all volunteers. Our role of the consultant is basically to be the ears and eyes on the ground to do the prevention work, like, hey, what event's coming up? Tell me about that. Tell me what it looks like, and connecting those students to the correct staff. They do not deliver Ladder of Risk. They do not deliver policy education, although they do a lot of policy, hopefully, clarification and connecting the dots to resources. And just from the PICAP end, I'm just trying to think of differences. Brooke, who's the new Lori Hart, Brooke's salary comes from the foundation. It's clumped in that, I think, $120,000 that we spend every year on prevention. And it's assessed through our insurance fee. Any questions from people? Andrea said this earlier, just, you got to think about your budget, who delivers, why they deliver, can they deliver, do they have, the resources to deliver. I know a lot of groups out there, ASTP is now kind of a thing. In Pi Kappa Phi land, we will only use Jason Kilmer for that training. I don't train on that. I don't expect Brooke to train on that. We spend the money on the training to make sure we get it right. I've watched some groups who really muddy that down, and like someone who was trained from Jason 5 years ago trained someone else who then trained someone else, and now they're training people. I don't get into that. I'm like, you have to, in that budget, do consistent volunteer training, retraining to get it right. I'm trying to think what else. What questions do y'all have? Andrea, did that spark anything else you want to say?
No, you covered most of it. I will say we used, at Kappa's organization, we used Holly for our ASTP training, but she's recommended from Jason. So that's one I would say. I could see no way you would not, with ASTP, you've got to get the right person to do the training. And we've been selective with who we bring in to train. Pre-me, there were some all-calls done, which seemed great in theory, but like I say, some people you have to be mindful of what training people are and aren't equipped to deliver, and that's okay to do. It's a hard conversation, but it's okay to do.
Yeah, and I will say a biggest byproduct for in Pi Kappa Phi watching for 15 years, we did all calls in the beginning because we didn't know anybody. Like it was kind of like, let's go. But if you do these things right, there's a lot of people like that might interview to be a leadership consultant. Just might not be the fit. They immediately go into this pile. Chapter presidents who get it, but in 2 years like roll them into that. The people who are teachers, who are trainers, who I call them people who are good men, throw them in there. These people I have watched. Because people are like, well, it's very expensive to train. I'm like, yeah, but these people are the ones who, like, we now have board members, like National Council board members of Pi Kappa Phi who came in as an ASTP facilitator. That's how we got them in the organization. So how cool is it for me to watch, like, that you've got this ASTP ladder of risk guy who gets it from the student lens this way and is now leading on a board. So I think you will start to see, if you do these trainings, people will totally get re-engaged in the organization in a different way, that they don't want to be chapter advisors. They don't want the 20 hours a week of drama, but they want to go in and kind of give their time and talent. And so for me, I've seen tons of good byproduct that I didn't really know was going to happen because of that. Any questions? Andrea, if you only had to keep one program, because I often, in my Holmes Murphy role, somebody will call and say, we have this amount of money, what program do we do? If you, this is the hard question, in your menu of things that you do that cost money, what do you think is the program your men need the most?
That's tough.
I know.
I think where we're at now, quite honestly, I'll give a couple answers. I'm going to cheat, but I think where what I inherited, ladder of risk, has been the most helpful for us to open up conversations. I think ASTP then is getting us there. So I would say those having those conversations opens up, it's a different type of way to have a conversation, which I think is important. If we were doing nothing else, though, if at no cost, campus resources, absolutely. Just connecting them to what's on campus. That's one of the biggest gaps, having done campus work. Students just don't know what's out there, and the way campus is even, like, it's great that we show this at orientation, but when they need to know where they can take a brother who's struggling, they need to know that information now. So those are the ones that stick out. But those, I think, and Lori, certainly credit to you for finding ASTP, because it's allowing us to have different conversations. And our men, like I always say, they want to have these conversations. They just don't know how. So we've got to give them those tools.
Yeah, two things I'll say to that. When people ask me, like, what do you think? I always go back to my go-to is ladder of risk. Our job, like, at the headquarters level, like, and we'll get to enforcement in 2 weeks, you can't, like, in order for the conduct process to feel fair, people have to know what we're holding them accountable to. And so I think a lot of organizations, a lot of contact offices, like, hold them accountable to stuff that they're like, well, you didn't tell me that. And so for me, I am a go-to of ladder of risk, of policy education. Our ASTP folks are ladder of risk folks. So, even in a ladder of risk program, we can get in ASTP information. But as I said to a client the other day, like, we're not a student affairs department. Like, a headquarters is not a student affairs department, but we're kind of becoming one with limited budgets, and it makes it hard because there's not that many of us. So for me, my answer tends to be ladder of risk all the time. Like, you have to do consistent policy education because the students can't get to a conduct process and say, well, we didn't know. And I think we've all watched that at the student level when the conduct office sweeps in and sanctions them, and you're like, when was the last time you actually did any education? They're like, that's not our job. Well, it's somebody's job. That's one thing. And then I will echo what Andrea just said. As far as campus resources, it's crazy to me that students have these devices in their hands, that they have the tools to find anything. But they genuinely, I think there's so many gaps in students not even knowing that the resource is there. I still, in my very limited role with Pi Kappa Phi, do their sexual assault response. And we have found, A, that we need a person, B, it doesn't need to be a man, based on who is coming to us. They are women, so they need to hear from a woman. And, my first answer is, or my first question once we get past everything is, are you aware of your options? Are you aware of your campus options? They do not know, because they don't sit at orientation and think about, oh, well, if I'm sexually assaulted, I need to pay attention here. Like, they're not paying attention to that because they don't think they're going to be sexually assaulted. So as far as campus resources, us as the headquarters being able to constantly connect them back to those resources, I think is huge. And what y'all are doing, just through the Google Doc, is innovative. Robert wanted to know if you could share the campus resource sheets for the campuses you've developed.
Yeah, I'm going to pop the link in the chat box, and then I'll send it, Bobby and Lori, I'll send it your way so you can include it when you send up any follow-up materials. So it's there. Like I said, it's public information we just put on there. If you can give us a little bit of credit for the time, but I've spent the time doing it, and I wish on no one else to go through those websites. So if we have common campuses we're on, it's helpful information for sure.
Thank you. All right, any other questions? Okay, well, people, we are going to be back together in 2 weeks, and we are going to finish this round 5. We're going to talk about conduct and accountability and what that process looks like. We're going to have Justin Angotti on the call from Pi Kappa Phi, who will be, that's kind of his main role, and he's been doing this for, I think, 8-9 years. So that's going to kind of end all of this, is group accountability, individual accountability, and then partnering with campuses. So we will see you in 2 weeks. And Andrea, thank you so much for your insights today and for all that you've kind of kicked ass in the last 2 years. So
thank you
for thinking outside the box and doing some really cool stuff. All right, y'all have a great day. Happy Wednesday.